latest revelations about just how utterly out of it Joe Biden was during his presidency. And the way the very same media that is today cheering a blow to Trump's authority spent 4 years covering for the lack of presidential authority and indeed competence when Joe Biden was president. Now, in the last 24 or so hours, Project Veritas released this undercover video of Democrat National Committee Vice Chair David Hogg suggesting that the answer to the question, just who was running the country, may have lain in the office of former First Lady Jill Biden, and in particular, in Jill Biden's chief of staff. Have a look.
Foundational question for me is, like, how corrupt is the DNC if so many people knew, or few people knew about Biden, well, the president of the United States?
I mean, I think the fact of the matter is the DNC is always going to be like a campaign arm of the president, ultimately. The bigger issue was like the inner circle that was around Biden. That's it.
And I can't stress to you enough.
Like Joe Biden's chief of staff, like, had an enormous amount of power.
Joe Biden?
Joe Biden's chief of staff.
That was like an open secret at that point. Like, I would avoid him. Like, he was scary.
What was his name?
Anthony. I knew how he looked, but I'm like, the general public wouldn't know how this man looked. But he wielded an enormous amount of power, and I can't stress to you how much power he had at the White House.
Meanwhile, more evidence resurfaced this week of just how wide the cover-up of Joe Biden's condition went. A few days ago, Jake Tapper, who was, it must be said, part of the media's cover-up of Biden's competence, declared that the scandal over the hiding of Biden's decline ranks among the worst scandals in American presidential history.
It is a scandal.
Yes.
It is without question, and maybe even worse than Watergate in some ways.
Right.
Because Richard Nixon was in control of his faculties when he wasn't drinking.
Worse than Watergate, you say? Yet, back in 2023, folks like Mark Milley, the general who was the former chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who famously said he wanted to understand white rage, whatever that is, told 60 Minutes that the man with the nuclear codes, Joe Biden, was perfectly fine.
I engage with him frequently and alert, sound, does his homework, reads the papers, reads all the read-ahead material, and is very, very engaging in issues of very serious matters of war and peace and life and death. So if the American people are worried about an individual who is, someone who's making decisions of war and peace and has access to, makes the decisions of nuclear weapons and that sort of thing, I think they can rest easy.
Oh, just great. So, what do the fight between Trump and the courts over trade on the one hand and the cover-up of Joe Biden's mental state on the other have to do with one another? Well, the link is that both cases are ultimately about who runs the country, who is in charge. Is it unelected judges, bureaucrats, and advisors who were happy to run things when the president was, if not a vegetable, certainly not in full control, and are now pushing back when there is a president with a mandate to remake the country as per the wishes of the American people? Democracy is absolutely at stake in all of this here, but you know what? It just turns out it's not in the way it is being portrayed. Hey, let's bring in my first guest now, New York Post columnist and author of the best-selling Biden family expose, Laptop from Hell, as well as The Big Guy, How a President and His Son Sold Out America. Miranda Devine, welcome to the program. I want to talk, first of all, about something that I spoke about in my editorial at the start of the show, about these claims that Anthony Bernal, the former chief of staff to Jill Biden, apparently, according to David Hogg, ran the White House during President Biden's term. Now, what do you make of this? I mean, we don't know exactly who was running the show when Joe Biden was president, but this does sound pretty damning.
Yeah, thanks for having me, James. Yes, Anthony Bernal is the diminutive gay factotum of Jill Biden, absolutely devoted, very loyal to both the Bidens. He's been with Jill Biden since Joe Biden was vice president, so over a decade. He dresses her, He glams her up. He plans overseas trips they take together on Air Force One during Joe Biden's presidency. And he and one other staffer were the only people who were allowed into the residence from the White House staff. They were the only ones who were allowed to see Joe Biden in the wild, as it were. And Jill Biden and Joe trusted her chief of staff, Anthony Bernal, implicitly with all the family secrets. I saw his relationship with her last year during Hunter Biden's trial in Delaware on gun charges. She was there every day, dressed to the nines with her entourage, which included Bernal, who was always at her side and at her beck and call. So he's made himself invaluable. And we now know from the Jake Tapper book and also from this Project Veritas video sort of leak from a couple of DNC operatives, Democratic operatives, that they regarded Bernal as probably the most powerful staffer, because Jill Biden, as Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson say in their book, she was one of the most powerful first ladies in history. So that made her chief of staff, Bernal, into an incredibly powerful White House staffer, and definitely responsible for protecting Joe Biden, covering up. There are ample videos. I wrote a column about him last year, actually, showing Bernal kind of edging in and catching Jill's eye when Joe was going off the rails. At one stage, he's in a Waffle House after his disastrous debate performance, and he's sort of looking completely bleary-eyed and out of it. And Jill and Anthony Bernal are sort of hovering around, and then you see them exchange a look, and Bernal raises both eyebrows in sort of shock, like we've got to do something. It's a very intimate kind of exchange of glances between these two people. I felt at the time that it was rather disloyal of a wife to exchange glances about the sort of mental state of her husband with someone who wasn't related, but that's how close they are.
Yeah, it does sound like, we almost had sort of a Woodrow Wilson, Edith Wilson type of situation here, going back to the president of the last century, who was basically debilitated, and his wife ran the White House for the last years of his presidency. But there's also, Miranda, more questions also rising up about this constant use of an Autopen, which is a device where, you can use this to create the signature of the person in office while Joe Biden was in office. Tell us a bit more about this controversy, because there is some suggestion that this may have been used to sign legal instruments, pardons, that sort of thing, by people unknown. And there's now apparently House Republicans who want to investigate this. Is there a conspiracy theory here? Is this for real? Could this bear fruit as a question of, the hand that had the Autopen was in charge of the country?
Well, look, a think tank has recently gone through all the signatures that they could find of Joe Biden's on executive orders, and most recently on the pardons that he pumped out in his final days, including for his entire family, and Hunter Biden going back 14 years. But and this think tank found that many of these signatures must have been done automatically by an Autopen, because there were digital signatures that were so identical to each other. An Autopen is just like having a rubber stamp. And considering we're now seeing that Joe Biden was not, it was obvious to us, but we're getting more stories that it was well known that he was non-compos mentis for not all the time, but for many hours during the day. There's a decent question to be raised. But the interesting thing is that the one signature that looks real is the one on Hunter Biden's pardon, because it's a very crabby sort of debilitated signature compared to Joe Biden's younger version signatures. So it does look like it was done by an old man who was rather feeble. But maybe it's like that because Hunter Biden was holding his father's hand. You just don't know what went on behind the scenes in those final days.
We've got a Biden clip as well. Let's have a look at this. This was just, I think, yesterday or the day before. Joe Biden back out there again.
Oh. There's also been a lot of discussion recently about your mental and physical capabilities while you were in office.
You can see that. I'm mentally incompetent, and I can't walk, and I could beat the hell out of both of them.
Well, do you want to reply to any of those reports, and also to the fact that there are some Democrats who are now questioning whether you should have run for re-election in the first place?
Why didn't they run against me then? I got beaten.
James?
Well, I don't know, Rowan and Peter, Rita, and hey, it's not a joke. It's not a joke what he's saying there. Joe Biden is a broken shell of a man. I think he's talking about Jake Tapper and Jake Tapper's co-author of this book that's basically been talking about how
he thinks he can physically beat them.
So this is the thing.
I thought he was talking about
Rita.
Trump. I don't know.
No, he did think that he could beat. Well, he
may well have been.
He still thought Rita that he could beat Trump. He was for
he's delusional as
well as everything else. Well, I think the two kind of go together. But, you hate to say it, it's practically just sort of sad how he's trying to sort of still cling on to this when he has been disgraced, when he's been outed, when the family is a mess, when he's had to pardon his own son, if it was him and not the Autopen doing it, for a whole bunch of... Hunter, with the Autopen, who knows? So the whole thing that's really fascinating to me is that now suddenly that the Bidens have no power, the spell is gone, the spell is broken, all of these people in the media, Jake Tapper and everybody else who were saying, oh, no, what they do on Sky News Australia, that's fake news, it's cheap fakes about Joe Biden. Well, now they can suddenly say, oh, yeah, look, we knew all along the guy was gaga and that he wasn't.
Well, no, they're treating it like it's some, investigation where they've uncovered stuff we've been saying for 5 years. But they're not looking that closely, James, because they're not looking at, you mentioned the Autopen. Who was making those decisions? Because it wasn't that guy. Who was determining who was going to get a pardon in the final days of his presidency?
Well,
Are those pardons even valid, given that he, as the president, he has to be the one to make that decision? And we've also learned the enormous influence Hunter Biden had in the Biden administration. This coke-addled whore enthusiast was acting as a chief of staff of sorts.
Essentially, Rita, we are now hearing all sorts of things. The first thing you got to say is that the press who are now suddenly in Washington, the press corps, saying, oh, look, suddenly, who knew? Why didn't we ask the question? These guys are like arsonists who then show up in the fire department to help put out the fire. That is all they're doing. There should be like a law. You know how criminals, when they commit a crime and they can't make money off of a book writing about the crime? All of these journos who covered for Biden said it's fake news that he's, losing it and all of this other stuff. And now they're cashing in and trying to get big fat royalty checks and save their reputation. It's bogus. But on the question of who was running the White House, this is such an important question. This week we've had not only revelations about what Hunter was doing, Jill Biden's chief of staff was also a big player. It has been revealed. Jill Biden's chief of staff. So the First Lady's chief of staff. It sounds like some sort of late Ottoman court sort of struggle in that place with all these different factions knifing each other, trying to get control of the Autopen.
Can't wait for the movie.
It's time for Media Meltdowns. Well, CNN anchor and co-author of Original Sin, Jake Tapper, still doesn't get it. He's been out promoting his new tell-all book on CNN, of course, where he's putting a lot of spin on why people should pay for his book and claiming he wasn't really part of the big Biden cover-up. According to Jake Tapper, no, he didn't scrutinise the issue of Biden's health at the time because he was just too polite.
How has writing this important book, investigating the Biden presidency, Jake, informed you about how to cover the current president?
Well, I just think in general, not Trump specific, but in general, I think that the press corps, and I'm certainly including myself, needs to worry less about politeness when it comes to these health issues. And needs to be even more aggressive when it comes to demanding transparency on health issues when it comes to the president. President Trump, while he appears healthy, he has not been transparent about his health records. And I think that that's something that the American people have a right to.
Of course, the conversation quickly shifts away from Joe Biden's cognitive decline, and there are now suggestions coming from CNN that Donald Trump might be hiding something, and we should all be worried about that. But Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson have been doing the media rounds, and more CNN colleagues have been putting the tough questions to the authors, whether it was really fair that the book is now getting some backlash.
Obviously, as you know, there has been quite a bit of criticism and a little bit of backlash to this book, just because some people are saying, well, you know, how much did you know? When did you know it? Should you have been more forthcoming? Just given your figure, given what you do for a living, should you have been more forthcoming to the public about what you knew about Biden's decline? Jake, is that criticism fair? Just give us your take on that.
Well, everything I knew about Biden's condition, I shared in real time. I didn't know anything more than most other reporters in Washington. I saw Alex doing some aggressive reporting from the White House, and I booked him on my show, and I urged CNN to hire him. I'm not going to take all responsibility or credit for him becoming a CNN commentator, but some of it I deserve. But sure, look, I mean, along with most members of the legacy media, did not cover this sufficiently.
But the interview didn't stop there, and this CNN anchor, while she's giggling and laughing, praises Jake Tapper for the timeline of his book.
After the election, I sent him a proposal of like 2 or 3 pages. He said he was in, and then we got to work. And it was
that is a very fast timeline. It's very fast.
It's very fast. It was, you know, we took time off in that period.
Amazing. Fast timeline. This book has been published 5 years too late. Someone needs to remind CNN that the American people are not falling for this, not this time. This is a network that lied repeatedly, and its star journalist is now profiting from telling you something that hosts on Sky News Australia were telling you for years.
Let's talk about Joe Biden. He has made his first public appearance since he was diagnosed with prostate cancer, attending his grandson's high school graduation. But on the other side, CNN journalist and one of the authors of Original Sin, Jake Tapper, has had a revelation of sorts. Now, he is claiming that politicians lie. Well, who would have thought? Have a listen to this.
And I think that we need to be skeptical of everything that we are told by people in power. And I mean, that obviously should be the mantra of being a journalist to begin with. If your mother tells you she loves you, get a second source. Right. But we just need to remember that. Like, politicians lie. White Houses lie. Power is an aphrodisiac. And we just need to all remember that.
Honestly, Kristen, I just think this guy is like a used car salesman. This book tour becomes farcical and more farcical as he goes along waffling on about all things. And now he's saying politicians lie. I mean, what's the next excuse?
Oh, I know. I'm so glad that Jake Tapper is finally interested in being a journalist. It's incredible. But honestly, I mean, do we really think this book or any of the other ones like it would have come out if Joe Biden had won the election? Absolutely not. As I wrote about in my Sky News column this week, the media, most of the media, the ones who aren't writing books, they're busying themselves in the U.S. right now, writing all these stories about rapper P. Diddy's legal problems and, you know, all these other things that just don't matter to Americans, like Bill Belichick, this football coach's girlfriend. They are completely ignoring what's in front of their faces with Joe Biden, which is, I believe, one of the biggest scandals in American political history, which is that there is a real chance, not for sure, but a chance that the president of the United States, the former one, Joe Biden, actually had cancer in office and was not disclosing that to the American people. Perhaps that it was covered up by his wife, Jill Biden, his doctors, and his handlers. And there's just a complete disinterest in that story by the media. It's disgusting.
Yeah, and there should be a full investigation as to who knew what and when. They shouldn't get away with it.